that Mentimeter?
Yeah, we can. Yes.
Okay, so if I can ask you, so there's a couple of questions on the slides there. If you could just go through, so the questions are, I'll put them up on the screen as well. Oh. So yeah, what would you like to walk more? Would you like to cycle more? What's stopping you walking more? What's stopping you cycling more? What would make it easier for you to walk more? And what would make it easier for you to cycle more? And what would motivate you to walk and cycle more? Just see how our results are coming through. So can I check that everybody's had a chance to vote on all of those?
I think I missed.
Not quite yet, I don't think.
Beliefs, I'm not sure, my screen changed.
Hi, Alison. It only gave us the option to answer one question, not all 7 that you listed.
Right, I wonder why. I don't know why it's only. Let me just try and send it again and see if that works any better. If not, is that? Are you able to access the other questions?
It just
no, just
reached
because
the end of the presentation.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I tell you what, then let's just do it in a more low-tech way. So I'm going to put the question in the chat. If you could thumbs up the question, if it's a yes, and no if it's no. Just try to close the Mentimeter. And then if you can just add in the comments for this one. If you just reply to the question with more paths. And the final question is, what would motivate you to walk and wheel more? What would encourage you?
That question's the one I believe we answered online.
Oh, is it? Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can get that one up then. All right. For some reason, I can't see those answers. But I think we'll continue on because I think we're getting some interesting stuff coming through on the chat. And this is what I would say when you're talking to people about, so this might seem a bit, especially because we had technological problems. This is what I'd say when you're starting to think about addressing people's travel behavior. The first thing you should do before booling in there with a whole load of thoughts is find out what people already think. So I'm just going to go back to my presentation and I'll talk to you about why we here at Sustrans, what motivates us to make it easier for people to walk, wheel and cycle more. Now, I don't know if you noticed, I'm using this phrase walk and wheel. So walk and wheel is a phrase that we use to encapsulate people who travel in wheelchairs or mobility scooters, so that we are sort of talking inclusively. And when we talk about cycling, we never use the phrase bike, so that we're incorporating all the different kinds of cycles that people might choose to use. So the reasons that motivate us is it creates opportunities for people to connect, because when people are in space, that creates way more opportunities for people to interact with each other. It's a healthy way to move around. It's a low pollution, mode of travel. It's easy on the wallet and good for the local economy because people walking, particularly people walking, but people walking and cycling are much more likely to stop and pop into somewhere just because they're passing by than if they are traveling through in a car. And the one that's probably the most important to me is a lot of people have a lot of fun walking and cycling. Although I did see all your comments about the weather, and yeah, it's a lot of fun in summer, but sometimes I'm from the northeast in the winter, it's slightly less fun. So those are the motivators that we have. We find a lot of the time that when we are commissioned to work with people to encourage them to walk and wheel more, the motivation for the people who are commissioning us is around air pollution or around climate change. And we know that the motor vehicle or road traffic as a whole contributes hugely to air pollution. It's 45% of the air NO2, 30% of the PM 2.5, 26% of the CO2. And in general, it's the highest other than construction. But not only that, it's also the place where you're most exposed to that polluted air. So if you're inside a car, you're actually exposed to more polluted air than you are when you're walking, wheeling and cycling. So, and also there's the other added benefits. However, and I'll come on to talk to this a bit more in how we deal with this in different settings, I would say that the motivation of climate and air pollution is never really, or is seldom, the motivator that is going to enable people to make that jump into changing their travel behavior. I think we all have lots of things we should do. We're walking around with hundreds of things that we should do that would be better to do. And it's about actually meeting people with the things that motivate them rather than giving them another burden to carry around. So our approach to changing travel behaviours is to talk to people and to understand what are the barriers to them walking, wheeling and cycling more, and how those barriers break down as capabilities. So maybe somebody doesn't know the route that they could walk. Maybe somebody isn't able to ride a cycle, and that's one of their barriers. Maybe it's an opportunity barrier, and I think in the chat came up quite a lot of opportunity barriers around there wasn't safe places for people to walk and cycle. And maybe it's the lack of motivation. Maybe there's nothing that's really encouraging them. They know perhaps that climate change is a problem, but none of their friends cycle. And actually, like if people, their friends and their social group were doing that, that would encourage them more. And we find through addressing all of these barriers, that can result in changes to travel behaviour. So we approach this through, as we did at the start of this session, doing what we would call scoping and gathering evidence, and then identifying those key barriers. And then we move on to working with whichever groups we're working with to co-design an intervention to come up with something that's going to work for the people we're trying to support to change their travel behaviours, then test that. And then implement an ongoing program. Behaviour change doesn't happen quickly. It's not like you do something once and then you're going to do that forever. It needs to have an ongoing program of support. And then at the end, we hand over. And we do behaviour change in two different realms. So my team really focuses on people and what people need to be able to change their behaviours. But as we saw in quite a lot of your comments, if the environment isn't right for walking and wheeling, that's going to be a huge barrier to people's capability and their opportunity to walk and wheel more. And we also have a design team who focus on changing the environment to make it easier for people to walk and wheel. And throughout all of our programs, we're continuously monitoring and evaluating and thinking about how we can improve our program, but also listening back to what people are saying to making sure that our interventions are fit for purpose and fit for the people we're trying to meet. In London, we focus a lot on those people who aren't walking and wheeling. There's a lot of infrastructure that means that quite a lot of people do feel they can, but there's still groups that feel locked out of that, and that's unlocking the benefits of the amazing sort of cycleways that we have in London to everybody and making sure that it's open to all. So we work in several different settings, well, 3 different settings I'm going to talk to you about today. So one of the settings we work in is in schools, and in schools we will work normally with 6 to 12 schools for a 2-year period, and at the very start we will go in and we will talk to the school staff, we'll talk to parents, and we'll talk to the young people about what are the things that are stopping them walking and wheeling on the school run, and then we look at providing them with the capability, opportunity and motivation to do that more. Interestingly, in a school setting, this is where the motivation around air quality and actually climate change is a really good motivation. Young people are very aware of climate change. They're also the most impacted by breathing in poor air. I've done a lot of work in Tower Hamlets where children's lungs are actually 10% smaller than the national average because they're breathing in that polluted air. And there's also if you work with young people, you know, one of their favorite phrases is, it's not fair. So once you start talking to them about the fact that they're breathing in polluted air, they become quite evangelized about it. So we do a lot of work with getting young people to measure the air quality in their local area, do some citizen science, and then talk to their grown-ups, because as an outsider coming in and saying, you know, your children are breathing in polluted air, it's maybe not going to have so much impact. Whereas if you've got your own children bringing this to you, then it's a much easier message. It lands a lot better. But we don't just say, oh, the air is poisonous. We also then work with young people to plan clean air routes to and from their schools. We give them air quality monitors that they can go out and measure the air pollution with and help them map some clean air routes to their schools. We also do a whole range of scooter skills training, cycle skills training, bike maintenance sessions to provide them with the capabilities. And in Opportunity, we often provide schools with a fleet of cycles. We work with the schools to set up those cycles as pool cycles, so they're able to continue to use those cycles and the parents can loan them over the weekend. And we do the same things with scooters as well. And we work with the school intensively for 1 year. And then as the school moves into the second year of the programme, what we do is we work with the school to embed these activities in the school so that they can continue to do well in their Travel for Life, which is something, a TfL thing, where they need to register to show that how they're promoting active travel to their school. And that results in behaviour change. So in the Tower Hamlets example, we decreased the number of pupils being driven to school by 8.9% and increased the number of children travelling actively to school by 13.5%. And you can see there's a lovely quote here from a member of the school staff saying, Bike It has had a major impact. It's helped the children make the link between air pollution, exercise and a healthy lifestyle. So that's sort of an overview of some of the work that we do within schools. But we also work in a community setting. In a community setting, we are often working with groups who have a low propensity to cycle, but would really like to cycle. So Sustrans did a report called Cycling for Everyone, which looked at the barriers for different groups to cycling, and people of colour, people with disabilities, women, and people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds were sort of indicated as groups that there was a high desire to start cycling, but the interventions needed to be more than just changes to the environment because their barriers to cycling were involved not having access and stuff. So this, and our community projects more often focus on cycling than they do on walking. So one of the projects we worked on was a project called Chris Street Community Cycles. So interestingly with this project, the sort of understanding of the barriers happened as a kind of separate thing to the project. We do something called the Walking and Cycling Index, where we do a really in-depth analysis of people's attitudes towards walking and cycling in their area. And we also had been running some schools work in the area, and we were hearing over and over again that people wanted to cycle, but this was in the borough of Tower Hamlets. That nobody had anywhere where they could store a cycle, and very few people had access had their own cycle. So we understood there was this demand for cycling, but there was this lack of opportunity to have access to a cycle, and then there was a lack of capability because a lot of these women that we worked with, this is a project focused on Muslim women but open to all, hadn't cycled since they were young or had never cycled. So through this project, we provided a cycle loan scheme. So we had a fleet of cycles that people could turn up any day and loan free of charge. They just had to show us their ID to be able to loan them. And then we ran cycle training sessions to bring people in, because we were focused on women, but a lot of those women had barriers to engagement because they were sort of nervous that maybe this wasn't for them. So we ran a really intensive summer program with lots and lots of activities for young people. But the rule was you could only participate if you came along and participated alongside your child, which worked really well because in September we had a cohort of women who kept coming once the children had returned to school. And one of the things that we'd sort of heard through this sort of engagement that we'd done through the Walking and Cycling Index and through the engagement for the schools work was that this group of women really wanted this to be a social the motivation was to do something socially together as a group of women. And so we ran celebration events where we celebrated everybody's achievement, whether it was being able to do 3 turns of the pedal for the first time, or whether it was cycling to work for the first time. So again, really different. And if we talked there about like climate and the environment, that wasn't the motivator for these women. These women wanted to be sociable. They wanted to do stuff together with their families. And that was the thing that motivated them to cycle more. And yet this resulted in behaviour change. This was a lovely project. It was in partnership with the Housing Association Pobla Harca and Hubbub, who are an environmental charity. So you can see off the back of doing this work, 97% felt more confident cycling, 97% planned to cycle more. Returning participants said that they'd spent 93% of returning participants said they were spending more time cycling, and 95 said they were feeling happier and healthier. And you can see there's some other stats there about them, like after attending a session, thinking about buying a bike, cycling to get around, and cycling for fun. So my last example is workplaces. So we've been working a lot recently with the NHS. The NHS have committed to a net zero, and each NHS trust has a green plan. So we worked with NHS South East and Barts. So NHS South East is Lambeth, Bexley and Bromley were the 3 boroughs that we worked in. So 3 quite different boroughs. And then in Bart's trust covers the northeast of London. So that was like Redbridge, Walthamstow, Tower Hamlets and Newham. And in these projects, we went in and we sort of worked with the staff to understand what were their barriers to cycling. So in NHS South East, these were all GPs. And people wanted to cycle for site visits. But when we started to talk to them about making those journeys via cycles, one of the big things they said to us was like, well, I need to carry a lot of stuff. Or some of them actually said, I need to pick up children. So at each GP surgery, we bought different cycles. So you can see the cycles in the middle there. I've got a big tray in the back and front so that people can carry a lot of stuff. Whereas the one under motivation, he's got cycle bags on the side. So we bought a range of different cycles. We also bought some cargo cycles for them. So we were making sure that the bikes we bought for the pool bikes were going to work for these GPs, and that gave them the opportunity to be able to cycle more. We then went in and sort of trained people up to be able to cycle confidently on the roads. And in this case, the motivator for a lot of the GPs was they were already very motivated to do this. It was about making it easy for them to be able to do within the working day. So having those pool cycles at work so that they could pick them up, take them out for a session and then come back really made it easier. NHS Barts, we actually worked much more closely on the policies of the hospital. So looking at where policies could be aligned or changed to enable more staff to cycle more. So things looking at what sort of was provided for staff around holidays and around travel arrangements when they got to work. That really helped, and we created a plan for them that they have now been delivering themselves. And these projects have only just finished, and as I said, behaviour change takes a long time, so we are not yet able to report on the behaviour change impact because we've just finished doing the interventions. And talking through this project, these projects, you'll see that I've been talking a lot about partners. And so one of the things that is really key is that we can't change behaviours on our own. We're always working with partners. And I would be keen to come back, because I can't see any of your faces, I'd be keen to come back to everybody here and think about the kind of comments that you were coming up with around the barriers that you have to walking and wheeling, and maybe some of the ideas that you might have about how we could work together or how you could work together with other partners in Kensington to make it easier for you and the people you work with to walk and cycle more. Just going to try and come back to you. So yeah, over to you guys. Any questions or any thoughts about how you could work together to make it easier for more people to walk and cycle?
Yeah, well, I just had a quick question. First, thanks so much for that presentation. It was really interesting. And we've got like a few projects that we're kind of just starting to encourage more cycling, and one of those is like a community social cycle, which we haven't just launched yet, but it was really interesting hearing about like the different motivations you found.
Yeah.
I had one question which was kind of separate to that, which I guess was like, how do more new innovations fit into this model? So like, I guess the popularity of e-bikes and people kind of preferring to cycle on those more, and how that fits into people's ideas of like safety. And I guess, yeah, just your thoughts on that.
So, I mean, e-bikes are brilliant because what they do is they provide an ability for some people to cycle who maybe couldn't cycle without e-bikes. There are some issues with some of the e-bikes that are currently on the road, that they are something's been done to them so they can go faster than they should be able to go, which does makes the conflict between pedestrians and cycles more risky. I mean, it's still less risky than with a motor vehicle, but I think, you know, building in e-cycles into any cycling that you have is really important, because there will be some people who wouldn't be able to try cycling without that as an option. And it's just making sure that you've got the correct training built into the program. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I have a question as well. I was just wondering about whether or not there's some sort of information that we can give people if people sort of want to start out on their cycling journey, maybe want to start cycling to work but feel like it's a little bit too far, around sort of taking like hybrid approaches. So maybe like cycling halfway and then getting a tube or something. I know that there's a lot of confusion around which tubes you're allowed to take cycles on and which ones you aren't, or you know, being able to like safely lock up a bike somewhere and not worry about it being stolen. So I think, you know, I think that would be really interesting for some people if they feel like their journey's a little bit too far, if there was some information around being able to sort of cycle a bit of the way or walk a bit more of the way.
Yeah, so there is improvements in the sort of digital mapping. So you can now use Citymapper, which will sort of allow you to plan to cycle and take trains, and it will give you the information about that. The TfL website's got quite a lot of good information. I would say at this point, we don't have all the information in one place. There's more, you know, TfL have got information on their website. Citymap has got some of the information, but one of the things that I think is really lacking is somewhere where you can just go on, you do a couple of clicks, I'm trying to get there. Oh, here's the option of cycling. Here's the option of cycling part the way. It's not quite as integrated as I would like it to be. But I would say probably TfL's website and Citymapper are the best that we have at this point. There's also personalized travel planning, which is something we offer. You know, I talked about Chris Street Community Cycles, or on our schools projects. We would have quite individualized journey planning conversations with people. But obviously to do that at scale would be quite difficult. But yeah, that's what's available at the moment. And we should all put more pressure on TfL to like get it all in one place so you can just and I mean, and all the digital mapping. If all digital mapping services had that provision, that'd be amazing. The other thing is foldable cycles are a great option. So if you're thinking of having pool cycles, I would really encourage you to consider foldable cycles for two reasons. Most of the higher cycles that are available to us in London, there's multiple different providers. Most of them are not suitable for all Londoners. Whereas a folded cycle, you can drop the seat much lower, and so a smaller person can go on it. A person who's maybe not so physically strong, because a lot of the e-bikes or the TFL bikes, they're actually really heavy and hard to move around. And for somebody learning to cycle for the first time, going on them once can put them off completely. So you can get some quite cheap, quite lightweight foldable cycles. They don't fold up and move around very easily, but they can work quite well. And then Brompton have sort of Brompton lockers that can be installed and are installed at quite a lot of stations, so that can be an option for people. But obviously the price bracket, if you're buying a Brompton or buying a pool of Bromptons, goes right up. Yeah,
that's really useful, thank you.
I'm just scanning back through your question. So it looks like from a lot of what the comments from the people on this call is the time comes up once, or time comes up a few times. So thinking about the sort of time point that comes up, I've cycled all my life because I lost my bus pass when I was 15 years old and my parents wouldn't replace it. So I started cycling. And then my parents would give me my money for my bus pass, but didn't insist that I took the bus. And I was like, what? So I've cycled everywhere. I cannot perceive the concept of having to wait for a form of transport. I find it so difficult. I know that when I leave my house, I will get to wherever I'm going at the time it will take me to get there. So yeah, time's a really interesting one, and I often look at the time it would take me to take public transport versus cycling, and it is quicker. But what does become complicated is if you need to take X people to here, this thing to here, and then get to work for this time, and that does become much more complicated and involves quite a lot of different cycle equipment that maybe you don't have access to, or maybe you can't leave at certain environments or certain places like schools and nurseries. So yeah, time's a funny one, but can be quite interesting. Lots and lots of comments about road safety. I'd be interested to hear, like, is there specific places where you're concerned about road safety?
Can I just take you back for 1 second? Yeah. You said about the complications of having all of this getting there, and what's the difference between us and Holland, say, for instance, where outside a train station you'll see 3,000 bikes just sort of all piled up, and it's something that we feel that we sort of can't do. You might have 6 bikes outside the train station. I don't know, I'm sure you've seen what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So I think there's a few differences. I think the biggest difference is culture.
That's the only one I had in my head. Tell me one that I don't know.
So I think they also have amazing. We got taken years ago now on a study tour to Holland. They have amazing safe cycle infrastructure and amazing cycle storage. They also don't have expensive bikes. Yeah. All the bikes are pretty standard, and you can pick up. There's not this fear. I mean, I can see there's a comment here about security. so there's not like nobody's cycling around on like the most fancy bike really, but it's that from very young people cycle to school. There is very good infrastructure, and that cycling is part of what they do at school. So they do sort of different cycle sort of exam, like cycling, like Bikeability, but that's really embedded into the school culture. There's huge stretches of cycle parking, and it's just seen as much more normal. The other barriers, the other things that people often say about Holland is, well, it's flat. But I mean, I'm from the northeast of England, and London is flat. There is 2 hills that I've found, one in Crystal Palace and one going out towards Brent. But you know, I used to have to cycle in the northeast, which was very hilly, and I think is a much bigger deterrent. And also, our weather's much worse. Yeah, but I think it is that thing that the infrastructure is really good, and it's really integrated in the way, in everybody's way of life. Yeah, Jenny, you were going to come in.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think what you were asking about the road safety, I find one of the things in London is that because there's a lot of parked cars on the road, and then you've got drivers on one side overtaking you, kind of pushing you really close to the parked cars, and the amount of times I've had to dodge a passenger door swinging open in front of me and nearly hitting me off my bike. Like, that's one of the things that I find quite difficult to navigate in London that I don't find in a lot of other cities.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an issue. I would say there's a couple of things there. One of the things that I love about cycling on the road is that actually by you being dominant, so sort of holding your space and being in the middle of the lane is what you need to do to remain safe. So having that dominant, and I think that we can often feel like, oh, we're less of a road user, so we need to be out the way and not, you know, try and make sure that we're giving way to cars. But if the lane's only enough to fit a cycle down and nobody can overtake you, then you need to actually cycle in the middle of that lane and hold your space and sort of being bold and being clear about what you're doing will help you keep safe. Car parking, like that sort of car parking along the side of roads and it being 2-lane it's a huge problem in the city, and it does make roads unsafe. If nobody can overtake you, make sure that you're in the middle of the road, and if they're beeping the horn behind you, they would be beeping the horn behind a car if it was there. The other thing is that there are some great cycle routes. It can be hard for a novice or a new cyclist to know where they are. The mapping devices, as you know, as I was saying, aren't quite up to speed. There is some stuff on TfL's websites that shows their cycleways, and there is quite a lot that could be done around route planning, and the London Cycle Campaign do a Cycling Buddies program, which is really great. So you can go out and sort of cycle a route with somebody else. The other thing is doing most local authorities, I'm sure Kensington is included in this, offer bikeability cycle training. And at level 3, they will often ride the route that you want to ride with you. But getting out and finding those routes, because I cycle, I live in East London, our office is in Brixton. I cycle here every day, and I cycle, it's a long way round, but it's a very nice cycle, and it takes me exactly the same time as if I went up the other route. Is I cycle all the way along the embankment past the Houses of Parliament and then come across Vauxhall Bridge, because I'm on completely segregated cycleway the whole way, and it's, you know, it's very pleasant actually. But knowing those routes and getting used to those routes, I think, is something that, like, I hope that there will be better mapping going forward, but having that expert advice is also really important. Yeah.
Yeah, I will also just quickly say on that, I found that on Citymapper with the bike bit, if you click the quiet option, that's quite good in terms of finding less. And there's also an app called Komoot, and that is like used by other cyclists, which like is really good, and you can get advice on there.
Yeah, and I think like using all of these platforms is really useful, and often it may say longer in miles, but it might not actually be longer in reality, because if you're within traffic and you're sort of having to navigate around traffic, it might actually end up taking you longer and be much more stressful than going through a back route that's sort of a quiet cycleway. They used to be called the quiet ways. I think they're all called cycleways now. Well, I know they're all called cycleways now. That actually can end up being quicker, or at least the same time, even though it's a further journey.
Yeah.
See. Just looking through your comments to see if there was any other. A few people have said more wayfinding will also help people find their routes. So particularly with pedestrian routes, but also with the cycle routes, you'll see there are signs up that sort of say this way, this many minutes. But better wayfinding also really supports people to be able to make more journeys. And it would be great, I think, to see at every bus stop and every train station the walking routes and distances to places that people might want to travel to next. Because quite often you can jump back on the tube or jump on a bus and actually would have taken you 5 minutes to walk or wheel. Any other thoughts about any other questions or thoughts about what you as a local authority think that you could do or would want to do more of to sort of support you all to walk and wheel more, or your residents for that matter?
I put a question in the chat. I'm not sure if you've seen it, Alison, but yeah, I do think security is a big issue and a big barrier for a lot of people, especially in a big city where there's unfortunately a lot of bike theft. So yeah, just wondered what your thoughts were on kind of how we can keep our bike safe, but also what we can do as a council, like for our residents, to try and support them to do the same.
This is the $1 million question in London. So for your own cycles, like make sure you have a gold standard lock. Your bike lock should cost 10 to 20% of the price of your bike. Even then, it's just a deterrent. Locking it in places that are overlooked is always better than locking it in somewhere which isn't. But I think the biggest barrier to people cycling in the city is at home, affordable, secure cycle parking. So lots of local authorities are installing cycle hangers. They're brilliant. They're very secure, but they're not cheap. If you've got a family, that's going to very quickly, and there's very few spaces. So as you know, if you've got more than one cycle in there, that's very quickly going to add up. I think as local authorities, I would love to see all local authorities doing more with local housing providers to say we need to have better cycle parking on our housing estates. And that is cycle parking that everybody will feel comfortable using. Cycle parking that's in a basement, in a dark basement where you have to go down there with your prize possession and lock it up isn't ideal. Ideally needs to be overlooked. ideally working with housing associations at minimum to put hangers in, but ideally having more cycle storage put in within estates. I live in Tower Hamlets, which is very, very densely populated, and I have a Brompton, and I don't think I could cycle if I didn't have a Brompton. So it's a sort of, that to me feels like a huge barrier that I would love to see more local authorities working with the housing sector for those people who live in flats, which is an awful lot of Londoners, to provide more cycle storage options, because it is a big barrier. And I've also seen I haven't seen any of this in London, but outside of London, you do have high street cycle parking, which is like a shop that you go in and you put your bike in there, then you go and do your shopping, then you can take your bike at the end afterwards. And they also offer like cycle maintenance and cycle rides and these kind of things. Yeah. It could be a nice way to reinvigorate some of our high streets.
And are those just for like short-term use then? So it would just be like during the day if you wanted to leave your bike?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and a lot of workplaces have similar sort of, you know, you can take your cycle in, it's like fully secure within the workplace, within a building. And like in workplaces, it's great to try and get some like lockers and stuff in there as well. Yeah. There have been some really good examples, and it's, you know, making sure that they work for all cycles. That's the other thing about cycle parking, is that you think a two-wheeled bike. What about a cargo bike? What about an accessible cycle? There's a range of different cycles that need to be sort of accommodated for. And Westminster have just put in their first resident cargo bike hanger, which is really exciting to see, and it'd be great to see more of those.
Sorry, was that in Westminster just like just storage, or was it?
It was so like the bread bin hangers.
Yeah,
for cargo bikes, yeah.
Oh, great.
And that was for residents rather than it being. There's lots of schemes where you've got e-cargo bike rentals, you know, and they're sort of either in boxes, or they're like locked as themselves and sort of secured within, quite often, these like mini parklet things. But that was for residents, and it'd be great to see more of those, because otherwise you need a garage, and not many Londoners have a garage or a place to get them into your garden. And again, not many Londoners have a garden. Some do, but not many.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's kind of in the works here, hopefully, like an e-cargo rental scheme.
Yeah. We've got an officer, so Sylvie, who's in my team, is embedded in Westminster Council and oversees all of their cargo offer stuff. So if you've got any questions, I can send them over to Sylvie.
Yeah, thanks. That'd be great.
Any other sort of thoughts or questions that people wanted to raise?
Nothing over here. Anything online?
I can see.
I can ask one. In terms of when you were actually organising the cycles and the different groups, what sizes of groups were you working with? And was it usually kind of like a one-person instructor leading something, or is it kind of like a group of you going out and engaging with people? What kind of numbers were you looking at?
In a community setting? So should I talk about Chris Street Community Cycles, because that was a project I sort of showed. So if we had sessions, people turn up for sessions. We would normally have like 2 people delivering the sessions, and we would take between 6 to 12 people. But what we tried to do with that project was say yes, because these were people who had quite a lot of barriers to even turning up. So they were here. So our sort of whole approach was to try and say, yes, you're in the right place. Yes, you can get involved. So what we would do is we'd take over the bikes that we had. So if we had a max of 12 bikes and maybe we had 15 women, we'd then sort of work with that number of bikes, but make sure that everybody had a chance to get and be involved. And with our staff, it started off that it was me and one of the team that were delivering from there, but through time we brought in some women who were really excited about the project, who sort of come along to a few sessions, and we sort of over time trained them up, and then they started delivering, and then eventually we were paying them, and so they were delivering alongside us as part of the sessions. And similarly with kids, probably about 6 to 12, and again doing some cycles sharing to manage the group. And it kind of also depends on the space you have and the kind of activity you're doing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, and in terms of kind of yourself, are you like, did you need to be qualified in anything in order to lead these activities?
Yeah, so all of our staff do bikeability training. We also do lead ride training. We also do some cycle maintenance training, walk leader training. So yeah, we do all that training, and we've got all the public liability insurance, and everything's risk assessed. And you know, after an activity, if anything occurs, then we sort of report back on it. So yeah, all of that happens. And then with the like our community champions, we started off by doing peer-to-peer learning and training them up to support the activities, but we actually took them right through so that they were like national standard cycle instructors by the end of the program, and they're now working with Cycle Confident and Bikeability, not Bikeworks, sorry, as well as the work they were doing with the hub.
Amazing, thank you.
Insurance is complicated. Insurance is the complicated bit. When you're trying, like when we are involved, the people are covered by our insurance, but we also have supported, like in Hackney, we are supporting a boxing club that is setting up a cycle offer, and they're doing it with some providers that are coming in, but they want to take it on themselves. But as soon as you don't have the registered provider, you then need to change your insurance to cover the cycling activities, and that's sometimes where some of it gets a bit complicated for people. Oh, well, for organisations.
Brilliant. Well, unless there's any final questions, yeah, thank you so much, Alison. That was really, really, really great, and it was really interesting to have a discussion around what we can do more sort of within the borough, and I think we're going to really take a lot of this away and look at how we can put it into action, hopefully.
Nice. Well, lovely to meet you all, and hope you have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Alison. Bye.
Thank you.